So this is the first meeting of the South Asia seminar for this term, and this term and the first half of winter term is going to find the South Asia seminar mostly presenting the work of scholars of Indian philosophy, and in particular of scholars of Indian philosophy who study Indian philosophy philosophically and take it seriously as philosophy. And Stephen Phillips is a worthy exemplar of that approach. Professor Phillips is at the University of Texas, which is the only place you've ever been, right? Is that
I was a visiting professor at Hawaii.
But it was your first job.
Yeah, it was my first job.
Been there for since doing a PhD at Harvard in both Sanskrit and Indian studies with Daniel Ingalls, one of the last students of Ingalls, you were telling me, and in the philosophy department with Robert Nozick. So interesting combination of training and of lineages. And Professor Phillips is a specialist chiefly on Navya Nyaya. He's got a book published by Open Court Press called Classical Indian Metaphysics, which is a study of Navya Nyaya in general.
Well, the interchange between Nyayikas and Vedantins in particular, but also sort of leading up to Navya Nyaya. Actually, the last chapter of that book's on Navya Nyaya.
Okay. And has been working on Navya Nyaya in particular lately. His most recent book is a massive, expensive, but handsome and impressive translation of the Pratyaksha or perception chapter of Gangesa's Tattva Chintamani. And it's interesting. For scholars of Indian philosophy, there's a lot of debate among scholars of Indian philosophy about when exactly you could say we have Indian philosophy proper. Some people talk about very early texts as exemplifying Indian philosophy. Some will say that, well, you only have something worth the name philosophy once you have full-blown pramana shastra going around the middle of the first millennium. But the really hardcore scholars of Indian philosophy, it seems to me, are people who work on Navya Nyaya, which represents for people who know anything about it, the fullest flowering of Sanskritic philosophical thought.
Well, the Navya Nyayikas profit from all the earlier philosophy. So they've learned a lot from it. I mean, even though they are staunchly opposed to Buddhists and so on, they've studied them, so they have that advantage of having this wealth of material that has been part of their education.
But at any rate, he's going to talk to us today about liberation, about the Multi-Vada section of Gangesa's Tattva Chintamani. So, thank you all for coming to see Professor Phillips.
Atam Mangalamastu. I'm very happy to launch this South Asia seminar series this year. I am a great admirer of a former professor here at the University of Chicago, von Boydenen. And I've been reading a translation that he's done of the Vedanta Sangraha with a graduate student of Ramanuja. And it's just so eloquently translated and explained. And what a great guy! At the very beginning of the book, it's elegantly published in India. You open up and he gives his title, and you're expecting some distinguished professor at the University of Chicago. What he says about himself, nothing else. He says, sometimes sub-editor of the Pune Sanskrit Dictionary. I thought that was just such great humility. That's a sort of tendency among Indian philosophers to, even when they know they're being very innovative and original and astute, they give the credit to their teachers, which is just the opposite practice from philosophers in the Western tradition, which is to steal from everybody and give nobody credit. Let me just say a few words about why I was interested in the topic of liberation in Gangesa. It's not what you. It's not a topic that you would expect the Nyayikas to be to have much of interest to say about. Since the Nayayikas are well known for developing a system of conceptual analysis and informing a theory of inference, and more generally a theory of knowledge or epistemology. But in Poland, where there was a conference on Indian logic and belief that Dan attended this last summer, and there is quite a eminent scholar of Nyaya. I won't mention his name because I'm going to criticize him, who said that the Nyaya system culminates, and Gangesa in particular, this sort of the founder, or at least the consolidator of the Nyaya movement, the New Logic movement, his whole system culminates as sort of the keystone of it all was theism and a particular argument for existence of God. And it's true that there are two editions of Gangesa's inference chapter, which is really long. It's I don't know. I've translated the perception chapter, the one that comes right before, and it runs some 700 and odd pages in translation. And the inference one is longer than that. And in this edition, in one of the two editions, the last section, which is called the Ishvara-Vada, so discourse on the Ishvara. But in the other edition, there's the Ishvara-Vada ends, and then there's the true end of the inference chapter, which is the Multi-Vada. And I don't know, I guess you sort of, if you're not really reading the text but just sort of looking at the table of contents, you might think that, yes, indeed, that the chapter climaxes in this and it comes last, the Ishvara-Vada, but really the Multi-Vada, and I translated it over the summer. It runs, I don't know, single space, some 80 some odd pages in English. Not one time in this chapter does Gangesa mention, in this section does Gangesa mention Ishvara. He has inferences about mukti, and he has a whole view about how you achieve mukti, but the Ishvara is not, God is not important in that. So that's really, I think, a serious kind of misrepresentation of the sort of spirit of Gangesa's work, and so that's what really motivated me to take this up. So let me read a little bit. If I'm talking about things that are unfamiliar with with which you're unfamiliar, please slow me down, and I'll just start trying to explain certain things. I'll probably just do that myself. But I have two copies of this paper. You might want to pass one to someone else. I also have a handout of quotations that I'll get to in a moment. Liberation, mukti, moksha, is a topic of philosophy set by the Vedic tradition as interpreted by philosophers of contending schools, by Mimamsakas, by Vedantins of several distinct factions, and though it may be surprising, by Nyayikas too. Logicians are hardly famous for their religious views. Subtlety in epistemology, blockheadedness in ontology is the school's reputation. But liberation is a central topic of the Nyaya Sutra, about 200 CE, and it remained central into the period of New Logic, Navya Nyaya, with Gangesa and his many followers. Nyaya philosophers join others in the Hindu mainstream in taking liberation to be the epistemic province of the Upanishads. On this subject, not on everything, the Upanishads are the pramana, the knowledge source. Nyaya holds an agreement with Vedanta in particular. But Vedantins are not the only ones who can read and interpret the Upanishads, assimilating scripture into a web of belief, also informed by sense perception and inference. The knowledge sources include Shruti, scripture or revealed hearing, but only on mukti and with qualifications dharma is Shruti not liable to be trumped by weightier authority. Nyaya and Vedanta agree in the main. Of course, in broader view concerning an ultimate goal of life as conceived in ancient India, Buddhists, Jainas, and various non-philosophic types, poets as well as saints and yogins, are as noteworthy as any Nyaya. A complex tapestry of ideas is woven over many centuries in unbroken streams of text. Classical Indian literature is, in all periods, full of stories of yogins. Gangesa mentions the Puranic figure of Shukadeva in the midst of his arguments. Nevertheless, our new logician, who lived around 1300 in what is now Bihar, inherits views about liberation and yoga not only from the general culture, but most importantly, in my judgment, from the old Nyaya literature. And these are sort of the mainstays of it, the Nyaya Sutra and Vatsyayana and Udyotakara. And Vachaspati Mishra, who are mainly concerned with Buddhists. They take Buddhists to be their opponents. And then the prolific Udayana, where the stream of Vaisheshika literature and Nyaya literature come together, and in effect, Vaisheshika disappears, being sort of absorbed into Nyaya. There's several problems concerning mukti in this literature, and I'll bring some of these up as we go along. Let me just say, in sum, that in this literature we have quite a bit of reflection about the supreme goal of life, the Paramapurushartha, and mukti, and there's a lot of tension in some of these views. The Vedantins are known to accuse Nyaya of having a view of mukti where the liberated person has no consciousness. That is flatly wrong. That's really unfair. There's a tension between a sense that the liberated will be disembodied and will not be reborn, or if they have a body, it's not a body that is subject to karma or a drishta. It will be independent of that. But it's flatly unfair to accuse the Nayayikas having such a negative conception of mukti. What they do have is a sense of what the appropriate conception of the goal of religious action is. And here they are negative. They think that the goal that we should pursue is freedom from suffering. Now, that freedom from suffering, which is mukti, and that's how mukti is characterized, may well be, have other, mukti may have aspects. It could be positively characterized in other ways. And I think the Nayayikas, though they don't comment much about this, they're certainly sympathetic to that view. It's just that we don't want to speculate about these positive aspects of mukti, since what's really relevant is how to think of mukti insofar as we're aiming at through our yogic practice and religious rites and rituals and so on, the supreme personal good. There's quite a lot of discussion about whether or not in these early texts whether or not mukti is a happy state. And generally speaking, the idea is that no, it's not happy in the sense, not in the sense of sukha. Sukha goes with dukkha, pain or suffering. That sukha is trailed by dukkha. There's no sort of sukha that is lasting. The Nayayikas have solidarity with Buddhists on this point. That doesn't mean, though, that there isn't some sort of, ananda or sukha in some higher sense. There are several Nyayikas that seem to be sympathetic to that view. But again, the point is that when we're seeking the supreme good, what we should focus on is freedom from suffering, not to be lured into thinking that we're going to achieve some supernal happiness. Now, in laying out a view of mukti, and particularly how it is achieved, there is a sort of standard view that the Nayayikas struggle with in trying to bring it into harmony with their overall philosophy. That standard view is that one has to have knowledge of fundamental truths. And when we have the knowledge of these fundamental truths, that helps us to root out what are called vasana. These vasana, or deep dispositions, are responsible for rebirth. Rebirth and future suffering are viewed as the normal course of things. And so philosophy is especially important because philosophy brings us to this knowledge of the fundamental truth. So philosophy actually helps us achieve mukti. Of course, the question is, what are those truths? And for Vatsyayana, the most fundamental truth in this process of realizing freedom from suffering is the difference of the self from the body. But Gangesa makes a big point, as we'll see later on, that one does not, one can have an intellectual understanding, have a cognition through philosophical training of the difference of the self from the body, but that truth is hard to hold on to without much more extensive knowledge, without knowledge of, in particular, the causes of suffering. So it turns out that we have to have a quite extensive web of belief to include, as I say here, I'm going back, let me read a bit, firm knowledge through philosophical training on controversial issues. So, and this is how Gangesa actually starts his section on mukti. We're motivated to see what inference can teach us about mukti, since inference is the philosopher's tool par excellence. So it's with this idea that through philosophy we can get, one might just hear about the difference of the self and the body and have an understanding of that, but through philosophical training and arguments and so on, we really get a firm grasp of the truth. And you have to have this firm grasp, as we'll see what Gangesa will say, look, a person who is dizzy, you might tell them what direction north is, and they might understand, but they're still going to be dizzy. They're not going to be able to hold on to that truth. You can know that there are two moons, that the two moons are an illusion, but you still see the two moons. So what philosophy does, and this is, I think, one of the most interesting sections of this, or parts of this section, the Multi-Vada, is that we have to do philosophy to have a firm enough grasp of the difference of the self and the body to actually realize the state of freedom from suffering. Now, the main part of my talk today will be to present some translations of Gangesa, and I have some handouts here of these sections. And I should have reduced this, I know. Gangesa is so prolix, and I don't know, I'm such a fan of his. I don't want to eliminate parts, so I've given you way too much. But I've numbered the paragraphs so that we might focus on what you find most interesting. There are three passages that I've translated for you. One, the very beginning of this long section, and then another passage that precedes an inference, a formal inference proving that mukti is possible. And then finally, a stretch of text about the relationship of philosophy to Shruti on liberation in particular, but also about the relationship in general. So here's how the section starts. Gangesa, the ultimate purpose of inference concerns deliverance, apavarga, the supreme good. Verily, and he quotes the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, verily the self is to be learned about, thought about, and made immediate in meditation. Shrotavya, mantavya, nididhyasitavya, which he glosses as sakshatkartavya, according to Scripture. And this mukti is, definition one, the destruction of suffering unaccompanied by a prior absence of suffering in the same locus. Now, this is just typical Nyayaka style. What we do is when we look at a concept, we try to come up with a definition, a philosopher's definition or characterization, an analysis that makes it clear. And there can be more than one of these. In the very opening of the inference section, Gangesa focuses on the key notion underpinning inference, which is vyapti, the concomitance or pervasion of one property by another. So that's say of smokehood by firehood. And he considers, I think 26 or 7 definitions and accepts about 8. Here on mukti, he considers in this long section 13 definitions by my count, and he accepts 3. But this one labeled D1, the destruction of suffering unaccompanied by the prior absence of suffering in the same locus, is the main definition. This is the one that he runs with. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 4, 5, 6 is quoted to commence the section. The bracketed expression does not appear in all 4 manuscripts used by the editor and may be an interpolation. I think it's Gangesa's gloss of the immediately preceding word, nididhyasitavya, which is particularly controversial among the Vedantic subschools. Gangesa's use of the bracketed sakshatkartavya, the self is to be made real to experience, suggests a theme that later becomes prominent and that we will discuss in connection with philosophy's relationship to Shruti. Mukti requires meditation and yogic practice and not just knowledge gained from Scripture, nididhyasa, in addition to Shruti. The term between the two, mantavya, is to be thought about, is understood by Gangesa to mean philosophic reflection, which we shall learn delineates lines of possibility. In brief, this is really interesting to me. I guess it's most interesting if you know a little bit about the Vedantic background. One of the main schools of interpretation of Shankara, the Padmapada Vivarana school, takes self-realization to not require yoga, that it only requires the understanding of Upanishadic statements. And there's a lot of debate with the other school, the Bhamati school, on just this point. Well, Gangesa, in line with his predecessors in Nyaya, does think that yoga and philosophy is a kind of yoga. It's a sort of special training that leads to a certain kind of skill, and it is also necessary in order to firm up the knowledge of the difference of the self and the body that is absolutely crucial to mukti. Okay, to turn to definition number 1, let's see if we can get a purchase of this. No prior absence of suffering in a given locus would amount to a total lack of current and future suffering for a particular individual self. Now, the technical notion is that a non-eternal property F is the absentee, the proteogen, counterpositive of a prior absence A at the locus L until the time F emerges. Let's see if I can make this just a little more intuitive. Okay, the Nyayikas are referentialist. The primary meaning of terms is to pick out an entity. Now there are two main views that are discussed in literature: the Anvita Abhidhanavada and the Abhihita Anvayavada. This has to do with sentence meaning. On one view, you have words individually pick out things, and then what a sentence does in its grammatically connecting, sort of syntactically bringing these words together, is reflect a fact out there in the world where these individual elements that are picked out by the individual words are indeed. I mean, the fact does bring these individual elements together the same way the sentence brings them together. But first, the words pick things out, and then so we're dependent on understanding the individual reference of the words, and then we understand the fact as sort of riding piggyback on those individual one-to-one correspondences. The other view is that no, the fact really is first, that the sentence picks out the fact, and the individual words have reference only in dependence upon the sort of sentence, the meaning of the sentence as a whole, so that the reference is really to the complex, and then we can see the individual words tied in, but they don't have reference independently of the fact that they. Well, it's only through our sort of analytic approach to things that we individuate the words apart from the sentences. Well, even though there's a debate within Nyaya, actually these two theories were pioneered by Mimamsikas, and they're taken over into Nyaya. And even though there's debate among Nyayikas about which one of these theories is right, still all words are thought to have reference. I mean, that's the primary mode of meaning. There's also secondary and tertiary, and even with Dhwani, which we'll call suggestion. There's another great professor here, Giroux, who's written the most lucidly on Dhwani of all, in all the secondary literature that I'm aware of. Even though those are admitted, they're all dependent upon the primary sense of words, which is reverence. So with an absence, when you say there's not an elephant on the table, what do you mean? Well, there's an absence, and this absence is a real thing. The absence is picked out by the negative expression, the not being on the table, but an absence is a relational critter, and so an absence always has a locus, something where it occurs. So the elephant's not being somewhere, namely on the table, and it also has an absentee. So the absence ties together a locus, the table, and an absentee, what is not there. That's called the proteogen. That would be the elephant. So we have an absence of. So we have these two terms that are joined by the absence. Now, there are different kinds of absences, and this is very important because we have to be very careful when we're doing logic and inference to be aware of just what kind of absence we're talking about, because the logic of absences varies considerably whether we're talking about atyanta bhava, purva bhava, dvamsa bhava, anyonya bhava, to mention the four most prominent types of absence. Now, what we're concerned with mukti, and so the technical term here is a prior absence. Now, a prior absence, and maybe a good example would be a calf that's born, of course, without horns, but will have horns. So we say, if you look at the calf, it doesn't have horns, or, I don't know, you see them budding on its head, and you say, aha, it didn't have horns earlier. Before it has horns, or there's a prior absence. There's an absence of horns before it has horns. So that prior so anything that emerges, right? Anything that's a transitory property has a time before it occurs, and at that time there is a prior absence of that thing somewhere. So for us, well, let me just speak for myself. Maybe there's some great yogis here from whom this isn't true, but for myself, it's sort of inevitable, given the sins that I've committed, that I will experience some suffering in the future. And so, but right now, that future suffering hasn't occurred, and so in myself, there is a prior absence of some suffering that will occur. Now, the traditional understanding of a prior absence is that it's beginningless, because, I mean, take I don't know, again, the calf's horns. Maybe that's not the best example because you think the head is not even there. But when something emerges, of course, it's no longer absent. But before it's there, I mean, there's that time goes back infinitely, right? So the stretch of time before, I mean, you imagine things that are emerging in time. So before their emergence, there is a prior absence of such things, stretching back infinitely. Now, this is the notion that Gangesa is going to challenge. It seems to me, though he's not absolutely clear about this. But what we want is not only freedom from from current suffering, but freedom from current suffering that's unaccompanied by any prior absence of future suffering. So we want a block, right? A block so that secures no future suffering. Well, the way he uses this technical notion of a prior absence. So there's going to be an absence of a prior absence, right? There's going to be no inevitable suffering, right? So there's going to be some sort of state of the self that is unaccompanied by a prior absence of suffering. Yeah, that's clear now. Okay. One can see that to hold on to a referentialist understanding of meaning, one does get ontologically into quite some I don't know, what should we say, contorted positions like this, but it's not my fault. Okay. Now, elaborating the causal nexus of mukti as a psychological state unaccompanied by a prior absence of suffering is the principal occupation that he takes up. And so let me try to summarize. There's a tension between the ideas. One, the prior absence of suffering qualifies only that locus where the suffering actually occurs eventually. And two, that it is the suffering that would be caused by a particular bit of sin that is targeted for elimination by an act of atonement. So prayaschitta, various ritual acts can eliminate. Okay, when you sin, you're going to pay. There's going to be payback. Nyayakas and Gangesa, this is sort of a broader view than Nyaya, but Nyayakas hold that the universe is justly arranged. Not only all of them hold that this is because of the Ishvara. Many of them are very sympathetic to the Mimamsaka position that it's all brought about by a drishta or unseen force. But whenever one does something wrong, it's sort of guaranteed that you will suffer for that wrongdoing. But by doing an act of prayaschitta, of atonement, one can cancel that out. So the tension that Gangesa is concerned with through a large part of this section is that of mukti being a prior absence mukti being a unaccompanied by prior absence of suffering, so that and sort of the idea that there is a prior if you've committed a sin, there is a prior absence of suffering qualifying yourself, right? That has been brought about by that sin, and then you do the atonement, and then that eliminates that prior absence, so that it's no longer inevitable that you will suffer. So there's a tension between the idea that, once you have the prior absence of suffering qualifying yourself, it's inevitable that the suffering come about, and the view that certain acts like prayaschitta or various forms of prayaschitta, atonement, can eliminate the sin and the future suffering. So what we need is a view of causality and absences that allows us to come up with a block of a prior absence, so that there can be no prior absence of suffering. Now, this may be just to move the lump in the rug, since it does seem as though certain prior absences of suffering, or X, that did exist do not exist currently, not because X now exists. I mean, that's the normal way that a prior absence is eliminated, when the absentee actually comes about. But what we need is an elimination of a prior absence by an act of atonement. Now, the traditional view is that a prior absence is beginningless. So I think you see the problem. But I think he's willing to countenance the idea of elimination of a prior absence without the absentee having come about. Alternatively, I admit you could read him as believing that prior absences are beginningless, and acts of atonement are part of the reason that there is no prior absence. There wasn't really a prior absence. It was sort of inevitable that you do this. But I really don't think so. I think that lands us in the predicament of current causation of something in the past. Okay, now this next section is just skipping a few lines from the very opening. You can see here it's worth looking at just for the sort of summary position that is taken. And so we have an objection, and this is the second of the quotations, the second paragraph under QA. Since non-arising understood as a prior absence is not something to be accomplished, and since there is another point to the idea of mukti, I mean, mukti is something to be accomplished, necessarily destruction only of the causes of some suffering, like destruction of a thorn that is causing pain, is the personal goal that an agent takes on himself. So although some effort to eliminate future suffering makes sense, here too concerning a putative supreme good, elimination of suffering should be duly delimited to what is possible for a person. Destruction of suffering is not simply, without qualification, a goal set by a person. Gangesa, don't think like that. Although there is some suffering that is destroyed without effort, such destruction of suffering as is involved in mukti, which occurs through the instrumentality of the breaking up of false cognition concerning fundamental truths of things, is to be accomplished through knowledge that is dependent on personal effort. To be specific, once there is a non-arising of further faults in the absence of false cognition and birth-spanning mental dispositions, vasana, due to knowledge of fundamental truths, there would be no effort to act, and thus no production of karman or unseen force, adrishta, and thus no further birth. Such suffering would be destroyed. Okay, now, this is the summary view. There's several things to notice about in this quotation. I find, in particular, the use of the word vasana to be significant. It seems to me that through the influence of the yoga tradition, dispositions called vasana have come to be considered as distinct from some skara, which may be dependent upon some particular life you're training in, some particular lifetime, your mental dispositions that you've created in this lifetime and maybe are destroyed with the body. These vasana sort of percolate up and shape your personality and experiences in future lifetimes. And so these are what have to be rooted out. Now, and again, the point here, though, the main point of this passage is that what we seek out is simply the elimination of these causes. Well, not just the causes, but to seek a state. The opponent says that we're just eliminating the causes, but Gangesa has this idea that we're going to seek a state, and I think this is sort of that he does have a positive notion of mukti, because he's thinking of mukti as a block to future suffering. So there's something about mukti that is so I don't know. We so thoroughly appreciate the difference of the self and the body that no suffering can arise in ourselves in the future. And so, and then a lot of what comes after this, and what I have is this sort of second set of quotations that run for quite a long stretch, have to do with the appropriateness of trying to achieve this block of future suffering. And with this, I don't know, I think I'd like to skip most of this, maybe because the very last passage, which I have labeled QC, has to do with philosophy and Shruti and also philosophy as yoga. But there is one part of this I thought might be really entertaining to you. So under QB, the first three paragraphs are concerned with what the appropriate conception of the goal is, namely this block of prior absences. But then the reason to think like this, the reason why, again, I think he does have a positive notion of mukti, because otherwise there wouldn't be this sort of steady block to any future suffering. But the reason we want to think of it negatively, he spells out, and it's prudence. It has to do with a certain view of the world. And here, I think this is really fun. It starts with the fourth paragraph under QB, where he says, "Therefore, the indiscriminate, who long only for pleasure, who look to pleasure even though it is shot through with greater suffering, thinking, if my head is to fly, let it fly, consequences be damned, direct their effort towards another's wife and the like, well, they are not the experts here. They who say such things as the good lies and dalliances in the forest, like Krishna's dalliances with his mistress in Vrinda forest. And in the dark woods of transmigratory existence, those who think about how many days there are that are difficult to bear because of suffering, and how much sunshine of pleasure and happiness, saying in contrast, this is like the circle of shade made by the hood of an angry snake. Well, they, the discriminating, are the experts." Okay. Again, then he's saying it's perfectly all right. He's not saying that, look, people don't set out to accomplish pleasure. Sure, many people set out like that, thinking, may I look at paragraph 10 and then back, thinking, may I be happy, a person sets out. And so he certainly thinks that, but he just thinks that it's for prudential reasons. What we really want is an illumination of suffering, and so this is the proper conception to have of the supreme personal good. Let's move on to the final section, and I hope we can get some discussion going about this. This has to do with philosophy and Shruti. So after this long discussion of the appropriate conception of the goal, he comes back to this quotation from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Again, verily the self is to be learned about, thought about, and made immediate in meditation. It's a scriptural statement that is pertinent. From other scriptural statements, learning that the self is distinct from the body and the rest, we discriminate, singling out scientifically, by shastric means, the types of things that words pick out, carrying out the thinking, the manana enjoin, which becomes firm, through considering the possibilities of it being understood in the wrong way. So in other words, Gangesa seems to be quite aware of Vedantins and in particular of the Advaita school, but I think also theistic Vedantins who misunderstand Shruti. And so his idea is that what philosophy does is delimit possibilities. The word that he uses here that I've translated possibility is upapati. So broadly we have a sense of what Shruti could mean. But lots of ways that Shruti, that we might interpret Shruti, they can be eliminated by careful philosophic reflection. Now, this is not to say that philosophy somehow is a pramana, is telling us concretely what mukti is like, or even what dharma is like in another context. But philosophy does eliminate a lot of bad readings of Shruti, and so it delimits the range of possibility of understanding Shruti, and so is quite important. Now, So then in the second paragraph from this stretch of text, we get the point I mentioned earlier about how this is leading up to the idea that philosophy is very important for firming up our knowledge of fundamental truths. Let me read. And it is incorrect that directly from knowledge of fundamental truths produced in conformity with Scripture, that you might think, like the Vedantins think, that you just understand that the self is different from the body, and then that's enough. But it's not, because that doesn't uproot false cognition and perverted epistemic dispositions, which are the seeds of transmigratory existence, for such is not found with such phenomena as directional confusion, as I mentioned earlier, on the part of someone dizzy where knowledge does not end the dizziness. Therefore, practice following the injunction of Scripture and sacred memory, practice long, with care uninterruptedly, a making immediate in meditation is produced from virtues, dharma, born of yoga, yogaja. This makes real to experience the fundamental. This makes real to experience. I mean, it's not enough just to have this sort of, temporary fleeting grasp of the fundamental truths, which makes one ready to uproot false cognition along with perverted epistemic dispositions, which are the seeds of transmigratory existence. All this being accomplished, there is no effort to act, etc., because there are no character flaws. Future virtue and vice are not produced. And then from the perishing through enjoyment of beginningless accumulated karma, one becomes free. Although the truth that the self is distinct from the body is understood just from teachings, there may be, for a person who is irresolute, no washing away of the impurities of lack of faith because of doubt or the attention being somewhere else. Therefore, reflection, manana, is necessary, and accordingly there is the scriptural statement is to be thought about. For reflection is to be accomplished only for that end. And so mukti comes from knowledge of the fundamental truths conjoined with actions such as unconditional and conditional duties, twilight prayers, and meditation for as long as it takes on the part of someone endowed with tranquility, self-control, sexual restraint, etc. Let me just read my last comments on these. Mere knowledge is insufficient for mukti. One has to have settled dispositions not to revert to perverted ways of seeing oneself in relation to the world. Liberation-friendly dispositions are developed through moral action, meditation, and yoga. Philosophic reflection is also an aid, principally by dispelling doubt and keeping one's attention in the right place. Philosophy eliminates putative possibilities and settles through careful argument on the right positions, including, to be sure, the view that the self is distinct from the body. Eventually, such tools become unnecessary as one becomes still, free from the effort that gives rise to virtue and vice, and, though it goes unsaid in this passage, future suffering. Accumulated karma works itself out through dispassionate enjoyment of experiences it promotes. Presumably, the jivan mukta acts, though without effort, and has experiences. And even if one is reborn, presumably one would be liberated from the effort that leads to suffering. Let me conclude with just a few more words about philosophy and yoga. It seems to me that Gangesa suggests that philosophy itself is a kind of yoga, a kind of self-discipline. One needs philosophic training in order to make progress towards mukti, insofar as there is danger in being misled about such fundamental truths as the self's distinctness from the body. Similarly, breath control and asanas can fend off disease and injury. Unfortunately, and this is a theme that goes all the way back to the Nyaya Sutra. Unfortunately, in the Nyaya Sutra, when yoga is discussed, it's discussed right before the section on Vada and the types of inquiry Vitunda and Jalpa, and sort of an overview of rhetorical strategies to use in a debate. And so, I mean, even though it goes unsaid, one gets the sense that, well, I mean, why is yoga and philosophy sort of discussed together? It's because, I don't know, they're looked upon as in some ways very similar, and I think it's that without that kind of debate skill, which, I don't know, in Tibetan Buddhism, I think that this is sort of carried on, that, the Tibetan monks, I'm not so sure if this is true also of the nuns, are taught that, yes, just as part of their meditation practices and other skills of the spiritual life, we have debate. And in the Nyaya Sutra, this whole section is the section about yoga, and then going on into the rhetoric, it says the reason we have to do this is because we can be led astray by Buddhists and others. And be convinced that we shouldn't try for this supreme goal. So I say, unfortunately, we live in the company of many who would lead us astray intellectually, and indeed, without philosophy, we probably would not see the point of directing the effort needed and in the ways required. For example, as Gangesa says, twilight prayers and meditation, for as long as it takes on the part of someone endowed with tranquility, self-control, sexual restraint, etc. Thank you.
And a few other disciplines, not to mention, there is pilot. And so it's really difficult. It's really difficult to introduce Dr. Nagaswamy, and I think maybe the best way to do this is to tell a little story. And the story is also, it's a very important story for Dr. Nagaswamy. It's at the heart of his short biodata that was Xeroxed and distributed, far above his many books, many of which are not mentioned even here. And that's the story of it begins by a person in Tamil Nadu tilling or digging up his land to build expand his house, and stumbling upon a huge Chola bronze, Chola Natarajan statue of Nataraja Shiva, and it's a kind of world treasure basically. It happens every once in a while in Tamil Nadu that people find these things in the ground, and this farmer basically decided to sell it. He sold it for a few pennies, I think 200 rupees was the sum, and it changed a few hands until it was sold for over $1.5 million to a Canadian businessman who wanted to put it in the pavilion of his company or bank or whatever it was. And just to make sure that he has the right thing, it somehow traveled outside of India. Just to make sure that he has the right thing, he gave it to the curator of the British Museum in London to kind of run a check on this and maybe clean it a little bit, and they called the police. And soon after that, there was a trial in London where the Indian government basically sued that this Natarajan, Shiva Natarajan from Pattur in Tamil Nadu be returned to his home, and the business person said, well, I bought this legally, and so on. And that was a very interesting case. It was in 84, I think, 84. There were a few interesting decisions that the judge had to make. One decision was whether this statue of Shiva Natarajan was the actual statue that was missing, that was dug from the ground, and as a specialist, Dr. Nagaswamy made this amazing presentation that proved, based on his vast knowledge of all Chola bronzes and all Shiva Natarajans possible, that this must be the same Shiva Natarajan from Pattur. Then there was another question that the judge had to decide upon, which is who can be the plaintiff in this case, because for some reason the government of India was not a legal plaintiff. It had to be a person who had to reclaim that Shiva Natarajan. And most natural person was Shiva himself, to claim that this part of him, this aspect of him, this Chola representation, this Nagarajam, had to be returned to him in his temple in Pattur. And so the judge had to decide whether Shiva is a juristic entity and whether he can come to the court as a plaintiff. And given the way the British justice system is run, this was considered and approved. Shiva is a juristic entity. And so there was then there was the discussion as to whether this is actually a religious icon, if this is really part of Shiva, or if it's just now that it's out of the temple and being dug and commodified and sold, maybe it's just an art thing that belongs in a museum and is owned by its buyer, however illegally obtained it. On which case many people were summoned to testify. The greatest scholar of Shaiva Tantrism, Alexis Sanderson, stood against God Shiva and said that this has nothing to do with Shiva. It's just a Chola bronze, and it has to stay. But again, the side that Dr. Nagaswamy represented won the case, and at the end of the day, Shiva returned to his home. And Nagaswamy thinks that this is the peak of his career, and it kind of involves so many of his skills and personas and expertise. So it's a pleasure and honor to have you here. And,
Thank
welcome.
Professor Vigel Brunner. I hope I am audible there. Okay? You want me to raise my voice? Little? No? Okay. Right, and it's a great honor and privilege to have been invited to be here in this great institute, the Chicago University. I am thankful to Professor Brunner, who, the moment he came to know that I am here in New York, he immediately sent me an invitation to come and present on any aspect of Indian art. And very rarely we have institutional heads quickly jumping into to get scholars to present their paper in their short visit. I am extremely thankful to you, sir, for giving me this opportunity, and also to be present in the midst of such great scholars, Professor Linhoff, Professor Tar, and my good friend Saskia Ebeling, who took me around Cologne architecture and so on. And in the midst of all of you are all greatly interested in the subject. And my young student, I can call you as a student, I hope. My young student, Risha Lee, who is also a research student here, who is now specializing in South Indian inscriptions, especially Tamil inscriptions, which she can read very fluently. I hope in the near future, this great institute will have a section dealing with the most vital source of history, namely inscriptions, written records. Others have an element of little imagination, poetry and other things have imagination, but solid factual information to reconstruct history. Not only political history, administrative history, judicial history, or literary history, and of course art history. You have to depend upon written records and dates, and you have to fit in where you don't have the date between one point and another point, where you have a dated monument, dated inscription. So we have nearly 25,000 inscriptions copied from Tamil Nadu alone, right from about 2nd century BC to 1900. And they throw such valuable light on all aspects of history. All aspects of history. I hope very soon we will have one section in this great institute so that all our findings are based on solid factual material. Sir, I thought I will present a paper on aesthetics of Indian art. These are presented as just suggestions, and I hope you will take it up and build it up, question or dismiss my views, but I propose to show you Indian art history, particularly sculpture and temple architecture. They developed along with the Alankara Shastras, which developed through the centuries, the literature which developed through the centuries. So one has to correlate this development of this particular science from early times to modern time, mutual impact and how it evolved. This will be my topic of this evening. There is a text called Chitra Lakshana. This is a very interesting text. The student goes to the teacher and asks him, teach me the definition of art. Chitra Lakshana, teach me Chitra Lakshana. The teacher says, to understand Chitra, you must have a knowledge of dance, Natya. So the student says, teach me something about Natya. Then the teacher says, you should know what is rhythm, tala. In order to understand dance, you should know rhythm, tala. It's called tala in Sanskrit. Then the student says, teach me tala. See? If you want to know something about tala, you must know the composition which is used for the dance, rhythmically presented. So you should have some knowledge of this kavya. Then he said, the student says, teach me kavya. The teacher said, to know kavya, you should know the words, syntax, meaning, how you compose the poetry, and so on. So it is an extraordinary ancient text which very clearly shows that all these are interdependent. And so I thought I will take that as the model and try to show you not only sculpture but also other parts of the interacting disciplines. This is just, you have already got it. Who I am, who is the gentleman standing before you is just. Next. You know this is Indian laddu. The moment you see, you feel like eating it, you know. Next. It comes to you. Next. You know this is vada. Vada. Now all these, when you eat, they give you a taste. The taste is called aswadana in Sanskrit. To experience that taste, aswadana. And of course, it's called rasa. The ultimate thing that you experience is called rasa. Next. Bhaji. So there is an ancient text which says, when we talk about rasa, the realization of aesthetic beauty, you see, you are reminded of this rasa which you taste, and these are all made of different ingredients, but each has a different taste. So Indian poetics have divided aesthetic realization into 8 or 9 basic rasas, and they have their ingredients to realize at the end. Next. Now, like the Himalayan mountain from where this river flows throughout India, and to Central Asia, from Central Asia in the west to whole of Southeast Asia, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Java, in all these places this concept has permeated from the very beginning of the contact they were able to establish. Next one. Yeah, this is Chitra Lakshana, which is a definition of art. Next. Here I am showing you a dancer just holding her hand. Next. Here is another dancer. She is also holding the hand like this. But there is a subtle difference. Both of them are dancers, both of them are dancing. This is called the first offering of flower in Bharata's Natya Shastra, called Tala Pushpa Putam. Pushpa Putam. She is having the flowers in her hand, offering it at the beginning of dance. This is what we see in the worldly actions. This is a worldly action in which she just offers it. But this girl, she has no flower in her hand, she is just suggesting that she is offering it. So this is what we call the dramatic presentation. This is just a suggestive presentation that flower is being offered. There is no flower. So that is worldly, and this is dramatic, or what is called Natya Dharmi, and that is called Loka Dharmi. In Sanskrit we call it Loka Dharmi and Natya Dharmi. According to the poetics, when you make anything explicit, then it is something like a statement. But when you suggest it, this has the greatest appeal. The spectator participates in it and has a feeling of it. So, suggestion is the basic of Indian aesthetics, overriding the Loka Dharmi. I will come to it a bit later. Next one. Yeah, you can see that. You have a feeling of offering, but nothing. This is what we call the dramatic Natya Dharma. In Tamil also we have a name for it. This is called Nataka Vayakki, and in Sanskrit it is called, the worldly one is called Ulahiyal Vayakki. Ulahiyal Vayakki and Nadaka Vayakki, 2 words. Exact translation of what you find in Bharata's Natya Shastra. Now here is a dancer, a delightful dancer, most delightful dancer in South, Alamelu Valli. This is purely beautiful dance pose. It doesn't suggest anything, but it is beautifying the dance. So it is something like an alankara which beautifies. Perfect pose. Hands are in perfect position, neck, face, everything is in perfect position. Such hand gestures do not suggest anything except beautification of dance. So these are called Nritta Hastas, pure Suddha Nritta Hastas, pure dance poses. Next one. Next. Now here you have someone who is trying to suggest something. This is with the help of these gestures, she is trying to suggest something. This is the Abhinaya part. So this hasta is called Abhinaya hasta, dance gesture. Next one. Here is another one. She is acting the Mahishasura Mardani pose, and she is trying to pierce that Mahishasura demon, and that is a suggestive Abhinaya pose. Next. And again here, this is also an Abhinaya hasta, dance pose. And then you have what you call the emotive communication of the feeling she has, is the bhava, which she is trying to communicate to the spectator. So, a great, beautiful smile. Next. Next. And this is here again, you see, in order to give a beautiful abhinaya, the eye must move along with the hand, says Natya Shastra. Yatho hastaha tato drishti. Wherever the hand goes, the eye should take you. The spectator is drawn towards the hand by her eye movement. So this is a beautiful, lovely abhinaya hasta. Next one, please. Just movement. Next. This is also an abhinaya hasta. She is just acting that she is playing on a lute or veena or tambour. Next. You can see the eye is very important. Next. Now the last one in dance pose I want to show you. That is something like a kingly pose that she is trying to suggest. And here is the story of Kannappan, one of the greatest dancers, Dhananjayan. He is trying to show that he is removing the eye. He was a hunter who removed the eye and placed it on the eye of Lord Shiva in the story. So that and he brings out the whole bhava on the face. So you have pure nritta hasta, beautifying element. Then you have suggestive hand gestures, and then suggestive facial bhava. All these constitute the signs or art of suggestive communication. So whole dance is based on suggestive hasta, suggestive bhava, suggestive movements. Next one. Now when one looks at a beautiful sculpture, he spontaneously explains, oh, it's poetry in stone. So the sculptor, he looks at it as poetry. Next. Now I just showed you that the knowledge of dance is very useful. Look at these legs. These have names in Natya Shastra. In order to suggest something, that particular pose is taken by the dancer, and that itself is reflected in the 700 AD sculpture from Kanchipuram, Kailasnatha temple. So the more you understand dance, you understand this process. Look at the hands. All these are also brought out by the dancers. Next one. Here is another beautiful composition. Absolutely perfect. We have this one, they call it Alida pose. Fighting. Another one is go back. One is forward and another is backward. So both these poses, Alida and Pratyalida of the Natya Shastra, is shown in this sculpture so beautifully in Kiratarjini fight portrayed in sculpture at Kanchipuram, Kailasnath. Next one. Here is another one, also the same type of poses, hand gestures and so on. Next. So aesthetic joy is called rasa. it is likened to the divine joy, raso vai saha. He, the supreme, is the embodiment of rasa. Next. I have a few basic words. Chitra. Chitra is the word used for sculpture, painting, all aspects of art. So sculpture in India is called Chitra, and Chitra means sketch, painting, delineation, and so on. Next. Here is a sculpture which we call Bimba. Next. The silk is a sculpture. We don't know what is the root of this word, but maybe from silk. Next. Skill in art and so on. Next. Then we have another word, kala. Kala is part, a part, or to excite or impel. So it obviously excites the onlooker to taste the beauty, aesthetic joy. Also, it doesn't represent the full man who is there. It's only a part of the figure that he is portraying. So that is kala, a part of it. Next. This sculpture is from Bayon in Angkor Thom, Angkor. So to show that it is all over Southeast Asia, just an example. Next. This silpa is called an external visual art, Bhashya Kala. Next. This is Bimba, decorated image for worship. Next. We call it Bimba. Next. Most of the Indian sculptures are religious images. Both the words image and imagine are from the same roots. Image is also defined as artificial imitation of an external form of an object, often of veneration. Next. This is one word which we come across, Sahridaya, one who has a sympathetic heart to experience the joy. And we have a wonderful definition of it by Abhinavagupta, who wrote a great commentary on Dhvanyaloka by Anandavardhana. Who is a Sahridaya? Who is an art connoisseur? Wonderful description. Next. Then this Abhinavagupta, we have a great work called Dhvanyaloka, great work on art, great work on poetry, commented by Abhinavagupta, written by Anandavardhana. So he says that aesthetic appreciation is called dhvani, suggestion. So there are two modes of communication divided. One is expression, what they call abhidha, and another one is suggestion, which is called vyangya or dhvani. No classical Indian sculpture could be appreciated without an understanding of the concept of suggestion. Then we have these words, lakshana and lakshya. Lakshana is grammar, lakshana is what we call ilakkanam internal, lakshya is poetry. Next. Many factors contribute to aesthetic appreciation: form, line and volume, material, space, chronology, artist, sahridaya, the spectator, and aesthetics. Any representational form, be it a sculpture architecture, dance or music that gives the mind immense joy, ananda, is called poetry or beauty. Next. So, we come to this most important word, kavya. Poetry was called kavya by ancient Indians. Kavaniyam or kavyam, born out of creative genius. We understand by the word kavya, beautiful poetry, and great poem, mahakavya, great poem. Next. So, Anandavardhana says, kavyasya atma dhvani. The soul of poetry is suggestion. Kavyasya atma dhvani. Now, kavya is divided into two categories. Shravya kavya, which is verbal poetry, that is, Drishya kavya is the second, visual poetry. So, poetry, literature, and also sculpture, architecture, both of them are called kavya. One you call it Shravya kavya, and this is Drishya kavya. This is music and recital, Vedic recital, studying or reading text. This is all Shravya kavya. Dance, sculpture, painting are all visual poetry. Next. Now, this is, when you see this, you really feel that's a wonderful creation. This is a first century AD sculpture from Mathura, Kushan period. You could see the joy, and you also feel the joy. Next. This is a bronze from South India, 10th century bronze made. Next. How do you get this rasa? How do you get this joy, delight of experiencing kavya? Is defined by the ancient grammarians. Vibhavaihi anubhavaicha sattikaihi vyabhicharivihi aniyamanaha rasa nishpatihi. I forget the other part of it. Time, space, line, volume, color, and sound are the main and accompanying factors all put together prepare the mind to taste the joy. Next. Natural environments softens one's mind and prepares it for the realization of the joy. Great monuments were erected in captivating surroundings. Surrounding also plays an important role. So, the knowledge of Bharata's Natya Shastra, the earliest available dance treatise, is necessary for understanding Indian art. Also Kavya, Indian Kavya. Nearly 20 chapters of Bharata's Natya Shastra are devoted to sound, phonetics, words, composing poetry, and how to communicate it. All these are all defined in Bharata's Natya Shastra. Look at this sculpture. This is again a 700 AD sculpture from Kanchipuram. And this sculpture, you can understand it and appreciate it in the light of Natya Shastra. Next. And here is another great work. Just drumming. But in that drum he shows the beauty of the hands. Hastas, mudras. Next. And this is one who plays flute, engrossed in the beauty of the sound. And that you also feel that he is playing and you also feel like playing it. Next. Now, this I have already told you. In Tamil literary tradition, is deeply influenced by Sanskrit tradition, especially Bharata's Natya Shastra. Tolkappiyam, the earliest Tamil grammar, refers to Ulagiyal Vadakku and Nadaga Vadakku. This is done in Agathinai part of the grammar. These are the same as Logadharmi and Natyadharmi. Next. Now here is another important tradition mentioned in Tolkappiyam, which is a grammatical work, where the whole landscape is divided into hillock, forest region, and then cultivated land and coastal region. This is considered the special division of the Tamil people. But we also have the same division in Bharata's Natya Shastra: Parvatam, Vanam, Nagaram and Varsha. Now each land has got a particular deity, presiding deity. Is Muruga in Tamil and Kartikeya in Sanskrit, Vishnu and Thirumal, Indra in both. In Sanskrit they also call him Purandara in the Natya Shastra. And Varuna, who is in charge of this coastal region. So, same tradition. This is considered to be literary. No effort has so far been done to compare the Natya Shastra with the Tamil grammar, because they thought this is only Tamil grammar. But if you take the whole grammatical treatise, Tolkappiyam, you get so many ideas that are already there in the Bharata's Natya Shastra. Next one. So there is a need for comparative study of Tolkappiyam and Natya Shastra. Next one. Yeah. There is one complete chapter in Tolkappiyam in Tamil which is devoted to the realization of rasa. And it speaks of only 8 rasas in the early tradition. Later on, Santa was included as the 9th rasa. Santopi Navamo rasa. This is the 9th rasa. Next. I come to explain art as poetry with the help of line and volume. The line, which is equivalent to sabda in poetry, creates volume. Next. Look at this beautiful sculpture. Fantastic. But what makes it so great is the beautiful line that takes you, flowing lines. This is an 8th century sculpture from extreme south of India, Pandyan contribution, near Tinelveli. Next. Now here is another great sculpture from Kanchipuram. You have Shiva as Bhikshatana moving. His leg pose shows that he is moving forward. And then we have Rishi Patni. So these lines, you should have an agreeable line, not a disagreeable line, will give you a different distortion. But here you see, next, how the artist has moved. This flowing line and this movement is an extraordinary, beautiful composition of the Pallava rulers, suggesting importance of line and volume. Here is another interesting sculpture. It doesn't show the sculpture in its frontality or front facing the front, but they are so joyfully discussing, at the same time supporting the superstructure. So even showing the back, they can suggest there is some beauty in it. Right? Now, line creates form and volume. This is an example. Also color. Color adds, like Alankara, it gives you all these colors. Next. There is another beautiful early sculpture, Mathura sculpture, 2nd century AD, 2nd century AD. Volume. That volume is created only by the lines, moving lines, beautiful lines. Quite late you don't get this type of moving, lovely lines, all sharp and they don't contribute to the next one. Here is another one. Both the importance of line and volume you could see in Indian sculpture, early Indian sculpture. Next. Now then I told you about the tala. Tala means measurement. Also tala is rhythm. Now here this head is taken as one unit and then neck is made proportionate to it, and from here you get another measurement. When all these measurements are absolutely proportionate as given in the Shastra, drawn from the experience, then you see that they are really beautiful. Next. Here is another sculpture. This is a 2nd century BC sculpture. You have the Brahmi inscriptions. This is from Barhut Buddhist stupa. A gentleman is bringing a casket. But you see the head is a little bigger and his turban is still bigger. It is slightly out of proportion. Chronologically it is all right, fine. As an art it is fine, but it doesn't have that aesthetic beauty that you saw in the earlier sculptures. Next one, because it is slightly out of proportion. Here is also another sculpture from the same Buddhist stupa. See the turban big. The artist has tried to be realistic, but not suggestive or creative. So, next. Aharya is one of the aspects of Abhinaya in Natya, where the costumes, here the costume is so well blended with the body of the Apsara or some Devata. So we call it Aharya. That is why Aharya, the costume is very, very important, and that is also an important mode of suggestion. But now we don't pay any attention to Aharya. Next. Alankara, beautification. Here is a 2nd century AD sculpture, clearly a lady dressing herself, Alankara. Nice, good. Next. There are 2 sculptures where they have minimum Alankaras, but still beautiful. Next one. Next. Now, when Alankara is subordinated to the main suggestion, then you have a greater appeal. Here you have a very good sculpture example. Though there is a big ornament, necklace, it doesn't overwhelm the beauty of the main figure. So it is subordinated to the main suggestion. Next. Here is another sculpture, also 2nd century BC, from the same Buddhist one. You have an image of Lakshmi, and on both the sides you have 2 elephants pouring water, which we generally call Gaja Lakshmi. But what has happened here is, the elephants are bigger than the main image. So the subordinate ones overwhelm the main one, and so there is a loss of suggestive element in this particular sculpture. Next. Now this is a painting, 700 AD painting from Kanchipuram. The surrounding area is suppressed to show the main one coming out, so that you can appreciate its beauty. Next. But here is a painting, late 17th century painting, where this color distracts. This is so harsh and hard. You don't see the beauty of the real gopikas. They are all tender, lovely, but the red strikes at you. You don't appreciate the beauty of this some of the sculptures in museums are put before harsh background. You don't see, you don't appreciate it. Next one. Here is another one of the same period. See the background is subdued, so the image comes out. Just as in poetry, we have to keep the alankara subordinate to the suggestive element. Next one. Here is another 11th century sculpture of Nritta Ganapati, dancing Ganesha. He is in the main niche, Koshta, Deva Koshta. But he is not the only sculptor, not only deity, there are so many other sculptures also. But all of them are shown secondary in small size to enhance the beauty of the main sculpture. Exactly like poetry, where you have to keep always in mind the suggestive element as the foremost, so that rasa aswadana is felt. This is a good example. So from 10th, 11th century, you see the Devakoshta sculptures bigger, and the surrounding sculptures are all made smaller. This is the 11th century trend. Next one. Here is how the surrounding is beautifully distributed in the 700 AD sculpture. Inside there is a huge sculpture of Shiva. Of course, when you stand here, you can see that. But the surrounding smaller secondary deities are framed so lovely, they don't distract the main sculpture, beauty of the main sculpture. Next one. This is a masterpiece. If ever you happen to go to India, I wish all of you go to India, and go to Madhya Pradesh Central Park, and then there is a place called Sanchi, which is well known for its Buddhist sculptures. From there only 20 minutes drive is this place, which is called Udayagiri. It's called Udayagiri. But you go before this sculpture, it will take your breath away. You just simply sit down and you say, oh, what a great sculpture. Fantastic sculpture. I simply sat for half an hour, I couldn't move. I couldn't move my eyes. So great is this one. It's more than 10-12 feet, carved out of rock, with all these surrounding sculptures for which your emphasis is given. I look at the devas who come to adore, like small pygmies here. The power with which Varaha Vishnu lifted the whole earth is brought out so magnificently in this sculpture. This is one of the earliest Gupta sculpture, 4th century AD. Next. Sir, here is another sculpture. This is from South India, from a place called Namakkal. Very few people go there, very few people see this. This is around 700 AD. Here again there is a Varaha lifting Mother Earth. And this is the floor level. It's a rocket sculpture. But Varaha went dived into the ocean and brought out the Mother Earth. The artist intentionally to suggest that Varaha is coming up from the depth of the ocean. He has left the legs without a carving. That is just suggested. You see him coming out of the water, lifting the Mother Earth. And look at the distribution. A great artist. It comes very naturally to them to distribute the sculpture and suggest this element. So here is an example of the intention of the artist to create the suggestion by utilizing the nature surroundings. Next. Here is another great sculpture. A bronze image of Shiva feeding a mriga, jumping up, standing on his hind leg. And look at his hand. Just giving few grass That suggests he is Pashupati. Shiva is the Lord of the living being. The Mriga suggests the living being. These are the suggestive poses that you find in all the branches of the mature Chola period. Next one. Now this you know, I am going to show you a few examples. Rasas are divided into Sringara, Hasya, Karuna, Raudra, Veera, Bhayanakaha, Bibhatsa, Adbhuta, Santascha. Santa is introduced later, but 8, fairly only 8. Now, they are not the 8 different rasas, 8 different sources through which you get rasa. Next. Here is Parvati's marriage. A young girl marrying Shiva, with a tender feeling, slight bend of the head, with a feeling in her face made of bronze, 11th century, beginning of 11th century. It is Sringara. Next. Again, Sringara. Next. Sringara Bhava requires soft, evocative stones. You see the lines there. Rishi Patni is going after Shiva. Next. Now here is a very interesting sculpture. This is a 2nd century BC sculpture from Barhut. It's a huge elephant. It is being drawn by monkeys. All monkeys are there. To the beat of drum and music. Drum beat, and then the huge rope is being carried. They take him in procession. Take the elephant in procession. Let us see where they go. Next. Halfway through, suddenly the monkeys thought, why should we go in front of this huge animal? Why not we jump on it when we go? And so all of them jumped on it back. And there is no space, so it caught hold of the tail. It didn't catch hold of the tail of the elephant, but it catch hold of the monkey, pulling it so that it can go. And still the music goes on. And he goes, this huge elephant animal goes in procession. Great music, great drum beating, great march. Next. Here we have come. The purpose for which they are taking him. The elephant has become small. The huge rope, with the huge rope and a tongue, the monkeys are removing his nostril hair, pulling it out. They are not able to pull it out. You see, it's struggling. The elephant is not able to pull it out, struggling. And then here is another one trying to do some mischief with his hand. So this is a very good example of 2nd century BC, how the sculpture suggests hasya. You feel like laughing at this portrayal. Next. This is the samhara aspect of Shiva. Down. You feel the samhara heat of Shiva's dance. 8th century. Next. Here is a beautiful sculpture of Shiva as Ardhanarishwara. And this part is broken, but you could see the treatment of the eye, the lips, nose, and the hairdo. It's a masterpiece of sculptural portrayal. Next one. This is Shiva kicking Yama, the god of death, as Kala Kala. It's also a 700 scale sculpture. It's a beautiful portrayal. You can see the agony of Kala, and Shiva just pushing him out. Next. And this is a raised brow and ball-like eye is suggested. and prescribed in Natya Shastra, which is called Raudra Drishti. When you want to show ferocious, furious aspect, then you show the ball-like eye. And this is practiced in modern times in Kerala, where they pay much attention to the movement of eyes, and not the other part of India, other dancers don't do that. But I can tell you one thing. You tell me the time, whether I am going beyond time.
It's 4:30. 5:30, sir. It's 5:30.
5:30? I can stop in few minutes, sir. Then there is one demonstration in a theatre of a dance from one gentleman from Kerala. He came and he said he was wearing pant and shirt, no costume, nothing. And he came on the stage, we all laughed. What is this man going to show us? Abhinaya. And he said he was a chemist now. He was originally a Kathakali dancer. He is now a chemist. He said, just watch. I don't say anything. He went on to one side of the stage and then he showed with his gestures trees, plants, flowers, animals, birds, everything through only gestures. And the animals jumping and a hunter coming and just aiming an arrow. The entire audience of more than 1,000 stood up and gave him a clap, which I can never forget. The power of suggestion practiced by the Indian dancers. These are all prescribed in Bharata's Natya Shastra, codified and given to us out of experience. These are all out of experience which they have given to us. And this is one such thing that the eyebrow is lifted and ball like one. Next one. This is another great piece. No time. Next. This is Veera. I go a little fast. Veera, representation of heroism. Next. This is Adbhuta Rasa. Next. That's suggestion. Shiva holding the fire. Next. Anugraha. Next. This is so much. Dance of Shiva has been studied and said several times by many expert scholars and all. Next. Next. That's a beautiful smile. One of the earliest Nataraja. Beautiful smile. Next. Here, just treatment of lips. Next. Now there are 2 points I will be showing and then I will finish. One of the greatest sculptures is from Karnataka, on the outskirts of Bangalore, on Sravana Belgola, where on a top of a hill stands for 80 feet high this great Bahubali, which Tirthankara sculpture. It is wonderful. You go on top of the hill and see nothing behind. 80 feet, one of the most beautiful sculptures of India of that period. And they do once in 12 years great Abhisheka on it. That time you must go and you see it's something wonderful. Next. All these were not, these are all not there. These are all temporary. They will be removed. So it just stands against the vast, expansive sky as the backdrop. Next. I am no Jain, but when I went and saw that, I became more than a Jain. It's so beautiful. Next. That influenced many other sculptures, but none could come anywhere near that earlier one. Next one. Lovely bronze of Shiva, Tripurantaka. Next. Now not only sculpture, but even the surrounding. A great temple on the banks of such rivers. When you go, when you approach the monument, when you see the sculpture in the best time, morning or evening, then you understand and appreciate the beauty of it. Next, here is the great festival like Madurai. Now, yesterday it should have taken place in Madurai, where Vishnu is brought to the river and the whole crowd you see, or we say devotees you see, they have been standing there for the whole night, singing and dancing. And it is in the early morning, just before the sunrise, that God is brought in procession to that river. Next. And here is the God in a golden harp who is being carried to the singing and dancing to the river. Is something great experience. Next. Next. Warning. Next. Now here, I hope you can stay for 5 minutes more. That now here is a mandala, and the color, each color has a meaning. Next. See, 1,000 pots are arranged like this as a mandala, which are used for abhisheka. Next. Here is a mandala, which may look nothing for us, but this is called Vastu Purusha Mandala. Before a monument is erected, these drawings are made on the ground, and different deities are located in those places. The entire cosmos, the planets, the stars, the sun, moon, and all other things that are known to them, secondary deities, all of them are distributed in each square. Next one. They are all invoked. The square is only a suggestive element to suggest the deities. Next one. Over which these great monuments, it is the Vastu Purusha Mandala drawn before the building of these temples are erected, and all those suggestive squares are made into sculpture and distributed in the image, in the niches. Next one. Now here is a kunda, circular. This is meant for Nataraja, invocation of Nataraja. So this is a suggestive element for invoking the primordial invocation in fire as circle. Next. Shanmukha. For each deity there is a different form, and that form gives the form for the superstructure, architecture. Next. Next. This is a hero stone, 600 AD hero stone, which gave rise to so many village gods and goddesses. Next. Here is a temple. It is in the midst of forest. There is a deity. There is no structure, no building. The forest itself is the temple where he is located. So these are, what do you call them? Do you call them as classical temple or folk temple? Which tells us such beautiful compositions, suggestive compositions are classical or folk. Next. I come to the last part of my talk, a few sculptures. This is a Bhuta. Bhuta, is a spirit. Next. This Bhuta worship in South Karnataka. There is no structure, only a platform, and this was built in 1972, where these shields and masks are all kept there, and they are worshipped. Worshipped at dead of the night. Next. This is the Bhuta face mask. Next. Here is a particular group of people who make their own costume. Next. He colors his face. He performs a dance at dead of the night in whom the God manifests. He gets possessed. It reminds us of what we call Velan Veriadal in Tamil literature. Next one. Here is a person who wears the syllable and he sings and he dances. When he dances, he creates a direction and a space, and in the center of it he dances. And the last slide perhaps. Now here he says, it is the personification or manifestation of the Bhuta who says, who addresses the whole community, village community, right at 3 o'clock in the night. Here I am for the sake of you. I am ready to sacrifice myself for you. Will you all behave properly, look after your children, care for the people who have got illness, and so on, promise me. So one man, it's a beautiful poetry, he sings a poetry. And here is a man, the village headman, who says, I promise we will all do that. And that takes place in the midst of a thick forest where you can't even go after sunset. And when you talk of Bhutam, you get afraid. And no light nowhere, the only light you have is your car light. And if you go a little shadak, there is some branch falls off. You cross all these and go to the midst of the village where there are hardly 200 people. This Bhutam Mata takes place. So it is not, next, this is the last one. There, it goes on in many places. Next one. Here is another one. And so I wanted to just present before you, it's not only poetry, it is poetry where we think of the pradhana and suggestive element. It is also in sculpture, it's also in painting, it is also in music. Of course, I could demonstrate with beautiful music all this. And also, with actual life, you can see the role of the suggestive element, Vyangya, and the impact of this Vyangya on the human mind to enable it to enjoy the aesthetic joy which we call rasa. Thank you, friends, for your time and learning.
Thank you. We have about 20 minutes for questions.
Professor, thank you so much for the talk. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about when you were discussing about the role of rhyme in creating